So, DrupalCorn, this is going to be a session about porting the flag module to Drupal 8. First question is, who the heck am I? This is an actual expression that I make when tests pass. I drew that at like 2 a.m. after DrupalCon Austin. I was really exhausted. My name is Tess Flynn, also known as Socket Wench. That's Wench, not Wrench. So Drupal Easy guys keeps getting screwed up. I am the module co-maintainer for Flag Friend, and for example module. So the first question you might ask is, why the heck should I import flag? Well, let's set the Wayback Machine all the way back to 2013. It's DrupalCon Portland, and I'm sitting in the audience listening to Angie Byron, Webchick, begging people to port modules now. And the argument was, we didn't want to wait to get Drupal perfect and then have people actually port modules and find out that it's not really how we want to do things, because contrib is very important. So I was sitting thinking about this. It's like, that sounds like a great idea, but the problem is, why shouldn't I just contribute to Drupal 8 directly? Well, there's a few contributing factors that led me to porting the flag module. The first one's what I call the reverse Sisyphus problem. Now, if you remember the legend, Sisyphus was by the gods to roll a boulder up the hill, all the way to the top, and then it rolls all the way back on him. He has to go all the way back down again, and starts over the whole process. The problem is, when I was working at contributing to Drupal 8 directly, I had the exact opposite problem. The boulder is already rolling down the hill, and I have to catch up to it every night with the subtle hope that maybe I'll be able to push some small amount of momentum into that boulder before it gets away from me again. And the problem is, my day job isn't Drupal. I have a family, I have a house, I have a mortgage, I have a very, very clingy cat. And the problem is that I only have about 2 hours an evening to do stuff. So every night that I tried catching up to Drupal, researching Symfony, understanding the big issues, I was already out of time. I never got to making a patch. I was stuck in what I called the Valley of Dearth. So up on Beginner's Hill, there's plenty of stuff that you can do to contribute to Drupal 8. There's issue summaries, you can run tests, you can re-roll patches. But once you get past that, once you get past those excellent first-time tasks, you kind of fall into this pit. And do you work on the API docs? Well, what's the standard there? Maybe you can do some file updates. But all the meanwhile, you're at the bottom of this valley, staring up again at Dev City, where all the real issues are. And you just kind of feel useless after a while. And it's not anything's fault. It's just that I have such a limited amount of time to work on stuff that it started feeling really depressing. So one day it came to me, as all ideas come to in the shower, that maybe I should try a different thing. So I decided, I'm going to port flag module. This is a crazy, bizarre idea. So first of all, who has used flag module in this room? A lot of people who have no idea what flag module is. Okay, this section's for you. So here's a picture of a node display on a Drupal website. And there's actually these little links down here that aren't Drupal standard. We have an unbookmark this link and a flag for abuse link. Both of these are actually flag links. Now let's take this kind of in an abstract way. So we have a node. We have a node on a website sitting there being a happy little node. And a user comes along and says, ooh, that's shiny. And then they think that's so shiny, they stick a flag in it. The module that makes the point sound is yet in development. Other users come along and they think it's shiny too, so they stick more flags into it. Now let's define what this actually means. A flag module enables administrators to define Boolean fields that can be attached to site content which each user may set or unset. This is from a core Boolean field, which would be for just the node. Each user can set or unset it. We have a few different objects here that make this happen. We have a flag object, which is the administrator-defined Boolean field. A few technical details. It's been an entity since 7x2x. It may be attached to only one entity type. When you define a node, it can be when you define a flag, it can be attached to nodes, or it can be attached to comments, or be attached to users. But if that entity type has multiple bundles, like Node has article and basic page and so on, you can attach it to multiple bundles of the same type. Flags are created under admin structure flags, and they may be fielded since 7x3x. There's also flaggings. These are entities that are created to store when a user sets flag. So every time one of those flags gets stuck in the node, it's a flagging. It answers these questions. Which flag was set? On what entity type was the flag set? When was the flag set? Who set the flag? And then we have a new term. This is one I came up with, which is going to make my English teacher cry, which is called flaggables. I have yet to find one spell checker on any platform that knows what the heck I'm talking about when I write this down. A flaggable is any entity that has a flag defined for it for which flaggings may be created. So when you create a flag and you assign it to a particular entity type, the entity type becomes a flaggable. So that's what flag does. Now we need to start the porting process. So the very first thing you want to do is not code. What you want to do is you want to start with a code review. Because how does your module really work? When's the last time you've really looked at every detail in a holistic picture of how the module works? Now, I had the advantage that I had relatively little experience with Drupal 7, and Drupal 7 and the flag version of the flag 7 version of the module, I had a little bit of experience with. So I had to do a code review just to figure out how the thing worked. And it's pretty typical. We have Drupal underneath. We have several different entry points, implemented hooks and alters, a function-based API. We have several different flag hooks that are defined, and even the module itself implements. But the majority of the code is in handler classes. Handler classes. Handler classes are designed so that they can relate a flag to a particular entity type so that they actually have all the specific code you need to glue it together. We get kind of a class tree like this. We have flag. Underneath that, we have flag entity, and a number of different flags underneath that. And you can already tell that if you looked at flag 7, you called flag, which called flag, which called flag, in order to call flag to make a flag. And by then, I was ripping my hair out. Mostly, this is a typical Drupal 7 module. There's a large surface area of straight functions. Entity support was refactored in late in the module's life. Object-oriented programming was used, but it's a bit like the blob in that it's very much a PHP4 style of doing object-oriented programming. PHP4 didn't have a very good object-oriented system. It was very immature at the time, and it had problems. As a result, you get these weird factory methods all over the place because we couldn't use a constructor to save its life. All methods were public, all class variables were public, and basically we had a big blob of functions. And this comes to look like a bad horror movie I'm watching in my apartment on Saturday night. So, where do we start from this mess? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is question all the things. No code is sacred in your module. You want to see, does it really have to work that way? When we coded this, we allowed for assumption X. Does that really apply anymore? Has things changed since then? How our users really use our stuff versus how we think they should be using our stuff? Can we do this better? Can we do this simpler? The next thing you want to do is set some expectations. This is the most important piece of advice I can give anyone who's looking at a process. So we've got two people here. We have the guy who says, I want to get work done. We have another one that says, I just want to learn. If you're the learning person, get started now, because you'll have the most benefit to most enjoyment ratio of working on your module update. If you're the guy who says, I have a deadline, it needs to be done in 3 months, and I have this amount of budget, stop right there. You will not have a good experience. You'll be frustrated. You will want to throw your module into the garbage and never work on it again. Don't do it right now. If you're in the middle or even just slightly to the I want to learn side, you might want to start the porting process and do an experimental port. In which case, you keep it light, you don't set a deadline, you don't set a budget, you don't make huge announcements, you just start working on it, see where it goes. And then you don't have all the additional procedural pressure on you to get stuff done when you might not be able to get it done. The next thing is you might think about, well, why don't I port the tests first? Because test-driven development's a big deal. Well, that's not a bad idea. Simple Test is available in Drupal 8 even now. But it kind of limits your thinking, because once you start with the tests, you expect your module to work this way. You're not questioning all the things. You expect it to have this kind of an API versus another kind of an API. And then you're basically doing a very weird porting process instead of looking how Drupal 8 works and trying to work with that. I skipped this. Yeah. So start with the most central piece of your module instead. This is what I did, and work your way out. So what I started with is I started with the flag entity. First, we need to design the flag class. So we have the flag class, and it implements an interface, flag interface, and derives from a class provided to us by Drupal 8 called config entity base. Flag interface is best practice object-oriented programming, because this way we just provide the list of methods that we know this object should have. That way, if anyone wants to create a new version of a flag object, as long as they have these methods, it should work just fine. It also allows you to sketch out what the class does without building an entire class. So interfaces are new in PHP 5, but they've been around in object-oriented programming for over a decade. So they're not a new construct, but they may be new to you. Next is configuration entities. Configuration entities are actually administrator-defined structures. They're the things that you build under admin structure. That's what a config entity is in Drupal 8. Its data may be exported to YAML, and it's basically structure, not data. In order to build a configuration entity, we actually derive from config entity base. It does all of the Drupal side work for us. It does all the saving. It does all the updating. It knows which class variables to save. It does all the real work for us, so we only have to do the bits of work we need to do. In order to support this, we have to define a config entity schema. The reason why is that PHP is kind of dynamic in the sense that you can define additional class member and class variables on the fly. Now, it used to be you could just define whatever variables you want in your config entity and Drupal will save them all. This is a recipe for disaster because you'll get a whole bunch of mess in your object and in your database after a while. So the config entity schema is kind of a safety valve. It marks which kinds of fields and what data we expect in order to actually persist those to the database. This is a sample of the config entity schema for the flag entity. It's really simple. It just says that it's part of the flag module. It's the flag entity. It's a config entity. And then there's a number of different fields with these types and these labels. That's all it is. This is just a sample. The file's a bit longer than that. But we define this in flag.schema.yml under the module root/config/schema. The nice thing is you could look at any other core module schema files to look at the same thing. So there's plenty of resources there. Just look for any file named schema.yml and you're good. In defining class variables, it's best to match your config entity schema as close as possible. And the reason why, you don't have to do this because PHP is dynamic, but it's best practice because it gives you code completion in your integrated development environment. Also, it's the easiest place to document your schema. You can put doc blocks in a schema file, but it's kind of weird and it's not the expected place. Most developers who are used to working in object-oriented programming languages will go to the object and look at the variables. And that's where you want to put it. That brings us to a second piece of advice. Please use an IDE and a debugger. It's time. Drupal 7 had about 3,000 files the last time I checked it. Drupal 8 has 4 times that many. It's a lot of files. It's not only a lot of files, but it's a lot of files spread over a lot of different directories. As a result, you have to admit that you're human. You're not Brainiac, you're not Telosian, you don't know these things. You're going to forget. So an IDE is there to help you remember with a whole bunch of nice little features like tab completion. So you want to have an IDE. I like PHP Storm personally, but it is a 4K product. You can contact them for an open source license if you run an open source module. And they will actually furnish you with a complete license for a year. If not, they do have a free version, which is their beta, which you can use at any time. There's also NetBeans if you want to go for a complete open source solution.
Or Eclipse.
Or Eclipse. I don't really recommend Eclipse anymore because PDT is a bit out of date now. And it just, I don't know, I haven't met anyone outside of IBM that really likes Eclipse. If you're going to define any schema variables that are bound values, that have to be a certain range of data, you want to define getters and setters. In that case, you want to define the class member variable as protected. If it's a public variable, usually for a string, don't bother. It's not really worth it.
Not worth what? Making a getter and setter?
Not really worth making a getter and setter, in my opinion. I've seen it used in a lot of other places, just the raw variable. There is an academic argument to be made that everything should be in the interface, but it depends. Also, never mark any class member variable that is a schema value as private. And the reason why is config entity base uses two methods in order to access all of the class member variables in the class, get and set. If they're actually labeled as private, PHP won't let you access that outside of the class. Config entity base is a base class. It won't see it. You'll get an exception, and then nothing saves. All right, so we have our flag class. Now we need to let Drupal know that it exists. We need to plug it into Drupal. So we have our flag class so far, and we have Drupal. And when we hand it to it as it is right now, it just goes, that's just a class. What am I supposed to do with that? And flag just sits there looking all sad and lonely because we didn't define a mouth function on it. So what we have to do is we have to give Drupal 8 a config entity assembly module for flag. This is a bit like those assembly manuals you get from IKEA to build your bookshelf. What it does is it tells Drupal, oh, this is what this thing does, and now I can go off and build stuff. So it's kind of, so what the assembly manual is in Drupal 8 is an annotation. It's the assembly manual for the feature provided by the class. Physically, it's metadata included in the class's doc block. Here's a sample of what I got a slide ahead of myself. It tells Drupal what the following class is, why it's important, and where to find the other important piece of functionality. This is a sample of flags annotation. You can see that the first line right there is probably the most important, and that's what we're going to talk about next. You'll notice it's just a bunch of key value pairs that are hierarchical in sequences. So it's actually very easy to define. The very first line is this @config entity type, and this basically tells Drupal, hello, this class is a configuration entity. Can you do something with it? And it's also, Drupal will figure out that it's a config entity when it does a cache clear. So when that actually is discovered. We also have this controller sequence, which tells Drupal where else to find other pieces of important functionality within your module. Now you'll notice one thing important here. These aren't web paths. These are class paths to classes within your module. So we'll point out how we connect that up in a sec. So first, next we need to build the admin interface. This is what the flag list page looks like right now. Actually, it's a bit more broken right now because I updated Drupal this morning. It's just a list. It has an add button, very straightforward. In order to build this, we have a flag list controller class, which we specified in our annotation. It derives from config entity list builder and provides the admin structure flags page. It only has two methods, which is why I love this class so much. It has two methods. One that builds the header of table, which also coincidentally defines the columns. And another one, when given an entity, we don't even have to get the entities. Drupal will hand the entities to us. That's the great part about this. And then we just build the row, populating out whatever class variables we need to pull from that class and shove in the table. It's beautiful. Next, we need to deal with the add and edit flag pages. Now, in a lot of modules, the add page and the edit page kind of look the same. They have the same fields. They might differ in little details, but in general, they're kind of the same thing. So what we do is we have form classes. Now, this is a bit more complicated of a class diagram, but the important part is we have an entity form, which is the main primary base class. Then we have a flag form base class, and then finally the flag add form and the flag edit form. Now, for the delete form, we derive from another Drupal provided class, entity conform form base. I'll talk about that in a second.
So wait, the add form and the edit form, are they usually like two separate, or do they like one implement the other?
Okay, so I was about to get to that.
Okay, all right, then go ahead.
So first of all, flag form base actually does all the real form stuff. It builds the form, it handles the validation, it handles the submit. So it does all the stuff that you would normally do in a number of straight functions within your module. So once that's all wrapped in a class, it's pretty much as you would expect after that. The add and edit form actually derive from the flag form base. We never use the flag form base directly, but we always use these base classes. The add form and the edit form only differ in how they modify the base form. They modify where the default values come from and the create and edit and the submit button text. This is actually going to be a common pattern in Drupal 8, that you'll have a form base for your add and edit form, and then you'll just have two different derivations which handle the little differences between the two of them. And that's actually proper object-oriented design programming, and it's a pattern that actually Tim Plunkett himself told me to use. The delete...
Can you go back to the diagram?
Sure.
Oh, I see. All right. So you make your own flag form base.
Yeah, you have to make your own...
And edit under that. And
Right.
that uses the core of Kennedy.
Yep, you got it. But since we're on here, the delete form does not directly derive from entity form, but from another class called entity confirm form base. Now, why does this happen? Because our delete form is very, very different. It's just a question with a description and a yes/no button. The nice thing about this confirm form is that it just has a few methods, which gives us what's the question, what's the description, what's the name of the delete button, and that's it. A very straightforward class to build. There's not a lot of work. You can build that in 5 minutes. Again, I already covered that. So now we need to make it routable. We have the admin interface, we have the flagging entity. Now we have to connect it so that people can actually use it. Right now, if a user makes a request via web browser to Drupal 8, usually what we would have expected is a go to hook menu. Well, we have hook menu anymore, so we can't do that. So instead, we have another file called flag.routing.yml, and that actually provides this list of route names and paths. And you'll notice that these are the web paths that we actually need. You can also include variables in there instead of a %sign and curly brackets. Now, Drupal 8 doesn't think in paths. It thinks in route names. As a result, you have to kind of change your thinking about how you define things. Everything you're going to work with is not going to be a path, but a route name. The path itself is defined in that routing document. The question becomes, though, if routing only handles the web paths, how do we do all the other stuff that hook menu did, like attach things to existing menus? Well, for that, we have another file called flags.link.menu.yml. That changed just this morning. And this actually adds to existing menus. And all it is it maps a route name to a parent route. So we have a parent route system.admin structure. And that's where that admin structure page is located. And that will give you that flag link on the side of your admin menu. Now the next thing we have to do, because we have our list, we have our add, and we have our edit, we need to connect the add page to our list page. And we do that through what's called a local action. We have another file that's just flag.links.action.yml, which attaches click actions to a parent route. And all it has is the route to attach and where it goes to. And that's it. It has a title as well, but I didn't have room for the table. All right. So now we have a flagging entity, and it works. Well, flag entity. Now we need a flagging entity. The design starts out very similarly. You have a flagging interface, flagging class, and instead of config entity base, we derive from content entity base. Content entity base is better for user-created data, user-created entities. Instead of a config schema, overload a method called base field definitions, and then the data is very similar. It has a list of names and a list of types. Also, we need to define a database table to store stuff in via hook schema. Flaggings are related to several other entities with Drupal via a few key values: the flag ID for flags, the entity type and type ID for the flaggable, and the user ID. The flaggings also contain the created time and also the flagging ID. Beyond that, flaggings are kind of weird. Because unlike every other content entity you've probably worked with, you never create these via a form. Never. You click a link. What happens is, web browser, someone visits your website via a browser, and it's going to Drupal will invoke a hook, flag entity view, to attach a flag link to that page. Later on, when that same user clicks the flag link because they think it's shiny, it will go to some route in Drupal 8, and then, well, what goes there? Well, we know that it eventually goes to entity create at the end. But in the middle, we need to figure out what happens. We used to have a method called flag. The thing is that this isn't a very Drupal 8 way of doing things because it's a straight method. So instead, we decided to create a new class called the flag service. The flag service is just a plain old PHP object. It's a popo. It's registered container-wide. Yes, I know. It's a silly one. In Java, it's called a POJO. It's a lot sillier in PHP, which I like. Flag service is registered container-wide via flag.services.yml, which tells Drupal, here's where it is, here's the classes, and here's what we call it. To use it, we just call Drupal service, we get the flag service, and then we can call flag or unflag. Very straightforward.
So why is this service?
Because it persists in the background all the time. That's kind of why it's called a service. If you think of a Windows service, it kind of sits in the background all the time as opposed to an application where it only runs when a user instantiates it. Yeah, I know. It's very, it's an old term. All right, so we have flaggings, we have flags, we have an interface. Now we need to make it expandable. So we have our flag entity, and we have a whole bunch of flaggables that we need to flag. Now what we could do is we could subclass our flag entity and create another class for every one of these entity types. But you kind of quickly run into a problem because there's a lot of different entity types. And then we're back to where we started. We don't want to recreate handler classes because handler classes are hard-coded in the module. They're hard to expand, and they're not discoverable, so they're not expandable by other modules. So let's not do that. Instead of subclassing flag, we add a plugin. So we have a flag type, which allows us to refer to whatever entity type that the flag is going to be. It's discoverable using a flag type annotation. I don't cover how you create annotations in this talk, but there's an example module example that tells you how to do that. It's added dynamically. It's not a subclass. And in order to facilitate this, we have a small class structure. Drupal provides plugin base. I provide a flag type base, and then a series of other implementations allow us to flag each individual entity type. The nice part is, if you have any other thing you need to flag, your own content entity type you need to flag, you create a new plugin, and then you assign that plugin to that flag. and you're done. You can put your own custom code in Flag, finding your own flag type plugin. It doesn't have to be to an entity, it can be to something else. So now we have plugins that relate the flags to the entity types. For entities themselves, for all entities, we have something called a derivative, which allows us to use data to create the appearance of multiple kinds of plugins for each individual entity type. So each entity type on the website gets its own plugin. Now we still have a problem. We've figured out where to put flag and unflag. We still haven't completed the path yet. We have a clicked flag link and it goes to some route in Drupal. So how do we fix that? Well, we replace that as well with another plugin. We have a link type plugin. Link types do two things. They provide the user interface of what happens once you click on a flag link, and also the route itself. That is the flag link itself. This is also expandable. Before, we just had Ajax link, confirm form, and normal link as three different kinds of plugins that we provide for link types, but you can define your own. And again, we have base classes. You can even expand on this your own. So it becomes very easy to define your own link type within Flag to do whatever you want. You want it to increment somewhere, go right ahead. We've got all the tools for you to use for that. We need to create an API as well. Part of the plugins is an API, but there's more we can do. In Drupal 7, everything was a hook. Absolutely everything. It was the whole universe. So everything that Flag did revolved around hooks. Defining flags, validating, creating access, reacting to events, providing flag types and link types. In Drupal 8, hooks aren't everything. We have better mechanisms now to provide expandability to modules. So what happens is we actually get a picture more like this. When defining flags, we just use the configuration initiative. You can actually define your own default flags in YAML. That's it. It's done. There's even an example in Flag module itself, the bookmark module, which provides a default flag. For flag types and link types, we have plugins. We still have hooks. There's a bit of a debate on whether or not we want to use hooks or not, but they still exist. But there's also events. Events are a bit different. So we have the flag service, and then what happens is something happens in Flag. We need to tell everybody about it. So how that happens is that Flag service talks to a component within Drupal 8 called the event dispatcher. The event dispatcher has a number of different event subscribers that say, I'm looking for flag events. And they register with the event subscriber and they happily wait to be invoked. When an event occurs, Flag service creates a new flag event class and then pushes that to the event dispatcher. The event dispatcher pushes that to all of the subscribers for us. This is extraordinarily easy to do, actually. We only have 3 events so far, so whenever something is flagged or unflagged, we have an event for it. Whenever a flag itself is deleted, we have an event for it. We still have hooks. The reason why we don't have module invoke all anymore. We actually have a handler service, module handler interface, invoke all. And in order to facilitate this, we inject the module handler into Flag service. This is why Flag service is a service. So we can inject things like the module handler into it and then call invoke all from there without having to go call slash Drupal ... service. Next thing is, what about running your project? These are a few lessons that I found out when I was working on this. First of all, you want to do everything in public, but you want to put a warning label on it. Instead of putting flag on g.o immediately, I was strongly encouraged to put it somewhere else, like GitHub. And the reason why is we don't want users to go and grab the code immediately and then start messing with it, not knowing that it might be broken, might not be working, and it might be a lot of headache for everybody. So in which case, it might be advisable to take your module as it's being written and put it somewhere else. But instead of just hiding on your own hard drive, it's best to actually get as much community involvement as possible. So I put it on GitHub, and now we're actually getting pull requests on a daily basis for Flag module. The thing is, ask for help. But when you ask for help, be very patient and really show your appreciation for any amount of help that you receive. There are places to find help, like Drupal Contribute. There's also on the website itself. You can find change notices or individual issues. A lot of my help from Drupal Contribute's channel. And this is where that advice about being patient and showing a lot of appreciation is very important. Because a lot of the time, if you ask a question for a core dev, they're already very busy. And if you take the time to be nice, to actually show that any amount that they provide is appreciated, not only will they feel better about the work that they do, but they will be more likely to help you in the future. So you have to show appreciation for any amount of help that you receive. If you need to ask for funding, is money your problem? Well, it could be. You might need travel money to get your team in the same place, or you might need to attend a conference, or you might take time off from work just to code things because you might not have corporate support. What I did is I ran a crowdfund in order to support a trip to DrupalCon so that I could get some of the final details of the module hammered out, and I actually did get a lot of work done on that. So crowdfunding is an excellent option if you don't have any backing in order to support your module development efforts. Mine was a really small scale project. Rules did the same thing, even on Drupal Fund, and actually had a much, much larger turnover in the amount of crowdfunding they received. So if money is your problem, you might want to consider crowdfunding. Also, things are a lot easier now. When I started working on this, I had nothing but people who were willing to help me in IRC in whatever code I could extract or understand from core. The problem with core code is that it's production code, which means it has a lot of compromises, a lot of specializations, a lot of things that aren't very demonstrable. And you might get false positives in reading core code as to what you're supposed to do. What are the important bits? Thankfully, we have example module now. Example module has been around for a long time, but we've been really pushing to try to get Drupal 8 examples together. Currently, we have the config entity example is already committed. It's stable. It's repository. So you can use that to base your own work. And since if your module has a config entity at its core, it's a great place to start. If you want to support what we're doing so that we can get all those other examples out on time, we have a Git tip team at git.com/Drupal examples. And also, if you are not sick of hearing me talk and ramble on for an hour, you can come to my example module session at Drupal Camp Twin Cities, which has the rather esoteric name. Example module ain't core. It ain't contrib neither. This is what happens when I hang out in Texas for a week. All right, most of this is actually information we've already seen. So if you're going to learn for your module development, start now. If you have effort, if you're trying to do this for work and you have a deadline, you probably want to wait. Do a code review. Please do a code review. Figure out if your module actually works the way you think it does. Then question all the things. Question everything. No assumption is sacred in your module. Take this as an opportunity to really look at how your module does things and where you could do things better. Use an IDE and a debugger. It will be confusing, annoying at first because it will be a new tool, but after a while you'll get used to it and then you'll think having it every day. Patiently ask for help, but please show appreciation. The more appreciation you show, the more people are probably likely going to help you. And everyone will feel a lot better about helping each other that way. Do it in public, but do it with a warning label. You don't want people to using your module when it's broken, because you might get a lot of frustration that way. Money is a problem, and you don't have corporate support, consider crowdfunding. And there's always example module to provide you a lot of sample code to get started. That's it.
That's great.
Mr. Reed.
So, since the flagging entity is a content entity, is it possible to like add fields to it? Like, why did you flag this?
Yes.
With like a text field?
Yes, actually that's a detail I skipped over. The flag entity is, I keep getting the terminology backwards of this, but if you have the node type and nodes, it's the same as flags to flaggings. So you define fields on the flag itself, and then that can be used within each individual flagging. So yeah, it's fieldable.
But would someone have to write a custom UI to expose that form since it's
That's the
linked by
current
default?
problem. In the current version of Flag, there's no UI to actually cover that, but it seems absolutely silly that we don't have it. And I really want to add that to the module, but that's something that might need to wait for a few months for us to get the rest of it finished.
One more question and I'm done.
Okay.
Why isn't the listing of flag types a view? Since views is in core.
Instead of a controller, you mean?
Yeah.
Wait, the listing of types, not the listing of flags. The listing.
You mean the listing of flags versus flag types, because they're different.
Yeah.
Either one.
Flag types are a plugin, so they're not really an entity you can create by themselves.
They're the config entities that you made.
Okay, so that's the flag.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Why is it not a view? Because that's not the code that I found.
I'm just wondering if there's a decision why, that's all. So.
Yeah, it's just not the code that I found, and I think that views wasn't quite working at the time I started it, and the list builder is really easy to use.
Got
So
it.
that's why I did that. Any other questions? Okay.
The slides were great. Are they going to be available for us later?
Yes, actually, they're already on GitHub. The URL is actually on the board.
Okay.
Oh, that's the session.
No, it's not. It's on GitHub.
No, I mean, that's the slide.
This session slide.
Yeah. Okay. Also, the complete source is on there, including the PowerPoint file with all of my weird little drawings on it. Just a note, if you do want to use any of the ones, I got one request already for the reverse Sisyphus comic. Just let me know if you're going to use that and what you're using it in. Just attribute me. This whole presentation's under Creative Commons.
So, are you going to be here for the sprint on Sunday?
I'm going to try to be here for the sprint on Sunday. I have to drive back that day. We'll see how things go.
All right.
All right, thanks everyone.